Welcome to What's in a Game. On today's show, Ryan Blackburn joins us and we review the Denver Nuggets' recent road trip. Does Jokic ball have a new identity on this team? We will break down the best and worst lineups around the best player in the world. Finally, Nuggets just went that whole road trip without Nikola Jokic, and Ryan and I are going to excavate the lineup data to try to find an identity for the Denver Nuggets bench. Stay tuned. Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean here with possibly the biggest Jamal Murray apologist of them all, Ryan Blackburn. How are you doing today, Ryan?
I'm all right. I've been hard on him. I want to make that perfectly clear to the audience here. I have been doing my darndest to try to get away from the apologist aspect of this because somebody gotta be held accountable, man. That's very important, and I'm not going to be in the way of that. I am going to try to treat him fairly and justly, I'll say.
That was a little tongue in cheek because I do know that Ryan has been, I think, harder on Jamal more recently. And actually, I think that I said this when I went on DNVR this past summer. We were talking about Jamal's summer with Team Canada and how Jamal is one of the most important reasons that I am such a big fan of this team. And I love Jamal as a player and he has so much potential, but I'm all about tough love when it comes to my favorite players. So I just wouldn't care as much if I didn't know, what he's capable of. But we're gonna get into that. Before we jump into the show topics, just a programming note. This is a little bit of a bonus episode. Will and I had promised to be back after the NBA Cup game against the Dallas Mavericks, but we realized that it would be too many games away. So we came back a little bit early with you all today with Ryan to look into some of the lineup data. I thought that this road trip would be a really great opportunity to, dig into particularly the Nuggets' identity without Nikola Jokic on the floor.
Right.
And that being said, we will be back next week after the Knicks game, I believe. There's a lot of games this season. Just look out for us next week. All right. I want to get into a bit of Ryan's background. Ryan, you are the host of Pickaxe and Roll and writer for the Mile High Sports Network, the co-host of Weekends with Swipa, which you also do with Mile High Sports, the newest co-host on the Locked on Nuggets podcast. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
Also Nuggets Twitter's favorite jinx.
Yeah, that's that.
So you've been covering the Denver Nuggets for such a long time. I wanted to know which player or era of the Nuggets really made you fall in love with them as a basketball team, and how did you come to cover them for a living?
This is some good lore because I don't think a lot of people know this about me. I started I was 16 or 17 in that general time, about 2013 season when the Nuggets were first getting going with George Karl and Danilo Gallinari and Ty Lawson and Kenneth Faried and that crew. They won 57 games, and I thought then that was really, really impressive. And then it hurt like hell that they lost to the Golden State Warriors after Gallo tore his ACL.
Mm-hmm.
I was on Denver Stiffs at that time. I was one of the Kremlins, one of the posters that was just on the blog and just hanging out.
Oh, that kind of poster.
Oh yeah, no, I was doing like hopping in the comments sections and talking about the game, and I was just on an internet forum basically with Denver Stiffs, and I was with Jeff Morton and Nate Timmons and Andy Feinstein and that entire crew. Adam Morris took over as the site manager there, and I was just a commenter for a while. And then I went off to college and realized, you know what? I went to college for sport management. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with that. I just like talking about sports. I like talking about teams that I care about. And for a while, it was the Broncos But then I just, for whatever reason, I started really getting into basketball and talking about basketball and really enjoying that aspect of sports. And it's something that because I played football and baseball growing up, didn't really play a bunch of basketball. I was okay in my eighth grade, like private school 10-person team that was there, but never really got fully into basketball until I started watching and commenting on the Nuggets. And one thing led to another. I took a gig for free. I wasn't getting paid for Denver Stiffs for a little bit. Then I started getting paid $75 a month. Then I got paid $150 a month. And then I got like just one thing led to another and started getting into like a more trusted avenue for covering the team and became the site manager over there. And so long story short, my username for Denver Stiffs was It's the Law Son for Ty Lawson.
Okay.
That was how I got into the Nuggets and then how I kind of got into covering the team.
That is such a unique story because like, well, at least to me. So
Yeah,
I've talked about this on the show before, how I was a like very certified casual basketball fan up until the title run and like learning about the Nuggets. I'm like, I'm fully adopting this team, like they're mine now. And I wasn't really into team sports in general outside of basketball, but I could always get into basketball, especially when playoff time came around.
sure.
And so it's always interesting to me, or it's been interesting to me to um as I've evolved in my own sports fandom, to recognize how easy it is to get into other sports when you're already into another one, especially when like you have, my timeline is full of obviously people from Denver because I follow so many Nuggets fans, but then I get into like, oh, what's going on with the Broncos and like what's
Right.
going on with the Colorado Avalanche, and just kind of by osmosis, like that information is coming to me. And sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, let me just check in on this game. Even though I literally never watch hockey, for example, but everyone's like, oh my God, this Avalanche game is like
Fun.
going is like out of control and that kind of thing. And I think that the thing that obviously binds, especially the team sports experience, is like that fandom and that community and like being around other people that can get really emotionally invested in an experience that is completely outside of themselves or their control when it comes to rooting for your favorite sports team. And that's been really, um, really special. I think it's so cool that you basically like posted your way into into covering your favorite team.
I
So
spoke it into existence.
yes,
That
that
was
is manifestation, right?
I was in South Carolina covering the Denver Nuggets. Like why would I do that? Like other than for the love of the game. Like it wasn't like I was getting paid to do it that much. So I was just enjoying myself. And for those that are trying to get into the business, sometimes you do have to make some sacrifices like that in order to get your foot in the door. Nobody ever wants to work for free. Nobody ever wants to do anything like that. And like there is, I think, a sort of culture now where you don't do that. And by allowing yourself to do that, it's kind of an admission of defeat. But if you do really want an opportunity, the best way to do it is just to make yourself available to people and then to practice and then to get reps and then to get better. I'm a better writer and podcaster now because I did it for free back when I could have probably gotten paid to do it, but probably wouldn't have had as much of an audience or an opportunity to do it. So if you're out there and you're looking for opportunities to break into sports, make yourself available. That's the thing that I could pass on as wisdom.
Yeah, rent is expensive though, right?
It is. I'm saying
The
so
rent
people
is
that
too
work
damn
long
high.
hours. That's the thing is like it sucks. It's not fun. And so not everybody has that opportunity, and I am sensitive to that as well.
So, something I wanted to bring up actually from watching your show, because your show is definitely one of the many that I was consuming voraciously during the Nuggets title run as I tried to become a ball knower. Right? I was watching a lot of DNVR, a lot of Locked On Nuggets, obviously, and Pickaxe and Roll as well. There was a time in the playoff run when I stopped watching your show like explicitly. And it was because I thought you were being too much of a homer. When you guys did the Den Vendors Assemble things, you were kind of doing them before every playoff series, or like before and after, and just kind
Yeah.
of reviewing how the Nuggets were doing. There was one in particular where I was like, okay, Ryan is just completely like off base here. He's being way too much of a homer. And the thing that made me think that, which just turned out to be completely wrong, was when you said in your prediction for the Lakers series was Nuggets in 5.
Oh, that's awesome. That's funny.
And like when they beat them in 4, I was like, oh, I feel like an idiot now.
You know what's funny? You know what's funny about that is I kept looking at it, I kept squinting at it and thinking, am I insane for not respecting this team at all? Like for not respecting the Lakers in any way, shape, or form? Like I just believe in what the Nuggets are doing. I believe in Jokic solving problems, and their big issue, like the big adjustment, was the Rui Hachimura adjustment. What are we talking about here? Like what are we doing? I remember getting flamed after game 1 for being like, what are we doing? Like this is they came back and it was looking bad for Denver, but Denver ultimately won that first game. And then Lakers, like especially Nick Wright and folks like that, were like, the Nuggets should treat this one as a loss.
Yeah, I
As a
should treat
loss.
that as a loss. If I'm the Lakers,
Cool.
I'm more encouraged than ever.
That's crazy. Like
That
and like
was Nick
good.
Wright was so funny throughout that entire run.
I
Like,
know. I
just
know. Good for him for playing it up. Like that's
yeah.
it's important to, like, that was as entertaining as it could possibly get. And that's what you want. But I was also like looking into into that series thinking, so like Anthony Davis can't guard Jokic, right? Like
Yeah.
we're fully past that as
Yeah.
a thing that he can do. So what is the actual answer here? And it turns out the answer was nobody.
Yeah. The answer was like maybe LeBron could guard Jokic
Yeah.
for a game.
A
He could
quarter.
do it for like half a game and then he has no legs
Yeah.
and that team's offense completely falls apart.
Yep.
So, yeah. Anyway, I was wrong and Ryan is absolutely a real one and I'm glad I realized it soon enough. Is there anything else about your background with the Nuggets that you wanted to share?
Not really. I mean, I hope that people know kind of what I've been through by now. Like I started covering them full time in 2019 when I became the site manager over at Stiffs. I was doing that for a little bit. The pandemic was obviously crazy, trying to figure out what coverage even was at that point. We were hopping on Zoom calls just to do interviews with guys. And then like it just has felt like a nice little reward for Denver to win the title when they did. Just because there was a lot
Yeah.
that the Nuggets and like Jamal Murray truthers and people, and he tore his ACL and then missed multiple playoff runs, and it just felt like that aspect of it was a nice little vindication. And I can be happy if they don't ever win another championship. I don't think a lot of other people feel that way, but I think that Denver at this point they've accomplished what they needed to accomplish, and now everything on top of it is gravy. And we'll try to see if they can do it.
We need to smother it in gravy though, Ryan.
That's the best kind of turkey, if we're being honest. Like Thanksgiving's coming up. I know everybody's going to be drowning their turkey in some gravy.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the Nuggets struggles, let's talk about a team and a fan base that is absolutely down horrendous at the moment. Okay. So Philadelphia is Phillying. Our favorite sports news outlet, ESPN, dropped a bombshell report 2 days ago about how Philly, after losing to the Miami Heat 106-89, a blowout loss in a game where they held a 19-point lead at one point, lost to the Miami Heat. They had a team meeting following that game. And I'm just going to read a quick quote from this story. The loss was the team's fourth in a row, sparking veteran guard Kyle Lowry to call for the meeting, a much needed heart to heart and a call to action and urgency. You know, a team that was 2-10 before that game, they needed a call to urgency. Players and coaches held each other accountable and took fault in the start to the season. So that's a really important point to this. This wasn't a players only meeting, it was players and coaches. Tyrese Maxey challenged Embiid to be on time to team activities, calling out the 2023 league MVP about being late for everything, quote, for everything, and how it impacts the locker room from other players to the coaching staff. Sources briefed on the meeting told ESPN.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Ryan, when you heard about this story, how lucky did you feel hearing about all this trauma that our superstar Nikola Jokic is literally as drama-free as it gets?
It papers over a lot of problems. That's for sure. Like, no matter what, Denver's never going to be a perfect organization. They're never going to do things perfectly. Like, Jamal is like, he's a flawed second option for sure. The process has never been perfect for the Nuggets. But through it all, you know that there's going to be one constant, and that is that Nikola Jokic is an unbelievable player, somebody that can do everything for the team and isn't going to complain, isn't going, like, his process is always good. He's going to show up. He's going to be in the weight room. He's going to do everything by example, and he's going to take responsibility when things don't go well. And that's one thing that we've seen every time that Embiid has been in a situation where, like, things haven't been perfect for him. A lot of times, like, he goes out of his way to make sure that he is not in the crossfire, to make sure that he's not downrange for what other people are firing their criticism at. And it was Ben Simmons, it was Jimmy Butler, it was Tobias Harris, it was Doc Rivers, it was Brett Brown, it was Al Horford, it was Josh Richardson, it was Tyrese Maxey, it was James Harden, and now we're finally getting back around to Joel Embiid. But we'll see. Like, maybe we'll skip him and go right to Paul George, which, I mean, another guy that's probably like in the crosshairs for many things at this point. But I don't know. Like, was I surprised? No. How could anybody be surprised at this point? This is a yearly occurrence.
So to your point about Embiid placing blame on others, I wanted to read another quote here from a story in The Athletic that it seems was about how, oh, this all happened, but just by the way, Nick Nurse and Daryl Morey are safe, everybody. It's all good. They talked about how team chemistry needs to improve, though Embiid and Maxey are fine. So they're trying to be like, okay, like, this is like a thing, but all the relationships are fine. Those same sources said that Embiid mostly agreed with Maxey's message. I highlighted that. Like, that mostly is doing a lot of work there. Embiid, league, and team sources heard the message while also expressing a lack of clarity and occasional frustration about how he is being used on the court. Embiid is coming off of some unspecified
hold on. Can you say that again? Like, yeah. The clarity on what he's doing on the court?
On
like,
how he's being used.
So what does he want to do?
I don't know.
He doesn't have to go into the post. He doesn't have to, like, do anything other than protect the rim, really. He gets to, like, at any time he gets doubled, they spread the floor as wide as possible so that he doesn't have to make any tough reads, any tough decisions. He doesn't have to rebound that crazy. Like, everybody else.
He kind of does, because they suck at rebounding.
Now they do.
He's
but, like,
not even like doing that.
Yeah, like, he's never been a great rebounder really, for the size that he is. Like, he should be dominating the boards, but it's just very rare. Like, that is par for the course is what I'll say. Like, I'm not really breaking any news here. With Jokic, you're never going to get these criticisms because you know that his mind is going to be in the right place. He's always going to look inward in these cases and try to figure out how he can get better in these situations before looking at anybody else.
Yeah.
And that is what has continued to make him the best possible player he can be. Embiid is plateaued. Like the injuries are a problem, and like that is an unfortunate thing. Like if he has done everything that he can to stay healthy and to stay in shape and to do the things that he's needed to do, and the injuries still happened, then like obviously that sucks, and nobody wants to see that. But I don't think that he's done everything that he's needed to do from a peer perspective.
I mean, if you have your 24-year-old co-star calling you out for being late to quote everything,
That's hard to
all
do.
these team activities, it's just like a really bad tone to set from the top, especially for a team when you think about it. This is a team that was outside of Embiid and Maxey built entirely through free agency.
Mhm.
Everybody else on the team is brand new. You're trying to set a tone, a culture of, taking things seriously, and that's just apparently not happening at all. Um, just one quick last thing, as I was scouring all the media sources for this because how could I not?
Oh
This is
yeah,
this
it's
is
like
number 2 on my hate
popcorn.
agenda list. Uh, the PHLY guys who are, I think, really great
So
members of the Philly media, they were not happy about really anything that they've seen from Embiid, whether it's because of the injury or not, because they're worried about like the fact that like, what if he's that bad? Why is he playing right now? But also with the revelations that came out from the leaks from these team meetings, they talked about how they were hoping that Embiid's experience at the Olympics with Team USA and playing with all of these high dedication, high effort guys and like Steph and Katie and LeBron who are like they're at the peak of when it comes to like you even like for all the criticisms you may have about these guys games and like they're obviously like getting up there in age, those guys are dedicated to their work
oh yeah.
both on and off the court, and they said that the Olympic experience was wasted on Embiid. That was probably the harshest criticism that I'd heard from anybody at all, and it was coming from these guys who were also fans of the team. Because I got into following basketball in the 2023 playoffs, and I was also following that Sixers Celtics series. And that was actually the series that really turned me on Philadelphia because I was mad at them for letting
Sure.
Boston win. Uh,
Absolutely.
right. But there was the Embiid criticism I thought had reached a fever pitch at the end of that series because of how he went out in that game 7 where, despite his criticisms of Tobias Harris, he scored less than Tobias Harris in that game. But this set of critiques about Embiid, like they're not really about like, oh, playoff choker, this or that. It's all about all the preparation like leading up to the game. And so I think that this is different. I don't know if it's going to result in a different outcome in terms of, how like Embiid's approach or the team's approach or anything like that. But this is one of the reasons that when Will and I did our team tiers going into the season, I just couldn't put them in a tier where I expect them to make a conference final, not only because they haven't, but because there's nothing that would make me think that this team is more serious
Yeah.
than they have been in the past.
Their serious addition this offseason was Paul George.
Yeah.
And like obviously that is a damning statement right there. And it's unfortunate because Paul George is another guy who's had a whole bunch of injuries happen to him, and he's been somebody that has been dragged down by that and was a different caliber of player, different caliber of leader at one point. But the Clippers stuff has definitely rubbed off on him. Embiid, I think the way he learned from the Olympics was that, hey, it's really nice to get carried every once in a while. And so he didn't show up to the first few games. And that was kind of cool. Maxey is, I'm sure, pretty frustrated. And like he's the son of Philadelphia now. So here's the thing, like if Philly ends up moving Embiid and they get a big package for him or they get what they can for him, then I don't think that Philly fans will be that upset. And because like this is one of those moments where you start to think about it as a franchise and you're like, yeah, we've been defending this guy because he's been our guy. But the moment that he's not our guy and the moment that he's not really bought into everything that we're trying to do here, like sayonara, big fella. Like this is all you need to know. And I think if you could tell them that you could get Bam Adebayo, Jaime Jaquez, and like salary for Embiid, then like they would do it. They would do it in a
Pat
heartbeat.
Riley is not doing that.
Absolutely not. How could he? How could he? That would be so irresponsible of Miami to do. And so that's the problem that they're now running into, is that the teams that are going to be willing to trade for Embiid are going to try to get him on a discount.
Yeah.
And they probably could have traded him this offseason and been a lot better.
The other big news item from this week is that the NBA and Discovery/Warner Media have settled their breach of contract dispute. So we talked about this earlier in the summer, how the NBA's new media rights deal basically cut out Discovery, which would mean no more games on TNT, which is owned by them. The new media rights deal includes NBC, Disney, which under that umbrella is ESPN and ABC, and then Amazon as well. Just as a quick summary, the whole with the lawsuit, Discovery had a matching clause in the previous contract, but they tried to match something that didn't actually match the way that they actually distribute games. They tried to match a cheaper package, but anyway, the NBA was like, no. And then they tried to sue. And now they're settling because they were probably going to lose that lawsuit. The major concession here is that ESPN and ABC will be licensing inside the NBA. And something important to note for that is Shaq is not yet under contract with TNT for next year. But Ryan, what was your reaction to hearing that, that this licensing deal with inside the NBA would be a thing? Because I know a lot of people were kind of up in arms about the fact that inside the NBA wouldn't be a thing anymore if, Discovery didn't have they weren't part of the NBA media rights deal after this season.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I didn't really care one way or the other.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate reality about this, is that a lot of people have very strong feelings about inside the NBA and what they've meant to NBA culture over the course of the past however many years. Charles Barkley's been on TV for, I think he said 25 years. This will be his 25th year. And I thought he was going to retire after this point. I thought that's what he had said. And now it looks like the licensing agreement is going to be including inside the NBA, which, I mean, it's got to include Chuck at that point. Ernie Johnson's wonderful. Kenny Smith he's fine.
Yeah.
Shaq is not my favorite. I'll say that. If Ernie and Charles are the ones that I would watch inside the NBA for, but the truth is I don't really watch inside the NBA that often.
Yeah.
Part of that is because I'm at some games, but when I'm on the road or when I have an opportunity to tune in, I'm not really tuning in that strong. And I'm surprised that ESPN's going this route. And they were hooting and hollering about that in their press release, that they got inside the NBA and everybody's excited. And the first thing that I really thought of is I don't really want to watch Stephen A and the Inside the NBA crew together. I don't really want to watch that. That's not going to.
Especially however ESPN and ABC is going to further chop it up from
okay,
the semi-watchable thing it is right now.
Now instead of 5-minute segments on the game or something funny that's happening, you're going to get a minute-long segment and then 4 minutes of commercials about what's actually going on around the league. And that's I've not been a fan of the way the ESPN's run their stuff. I've not been a fan of the way the TNT's kind of going out sad right now. And my hope in all of this is that Amazon or NBC can put together a matching product that takes away some of that viewership and really pushes the game forward, because the game has not been pushed forward by either of those last two entities.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I honestly, when I saw that they'd have the licensing, rights, I was like, well, they might not even use it. This feels like a fake concession that they just had to have in the settlement to save face because they were going to lose the lawsuit anyway. Just one major implication of this is that it is one less barrier to expansion. Adam Silver, when asked about expansion and adding, I believe they're looking at adding 2 more NBA teams is the word on the street. They were waiting, 1, to get the media rights deal like finalized and through, and 2, to make sure that the sales, or I guess ownership dispute in the case of the Timberwolves, was resolved first, and then the sale of the Boston Celtics, which is on the market right now, and it seems like they have a buyer lined up and ready to go, goes through before they move on for expansion. But the media rights deal was a major part of that. So
Right.
after those other things are resolved, expect talks about expansion and West teams jockeying to get thrown into the Eastern Conference to begin. I just had this in my notes here, Ryan, about how there's this contentious ownership dispute that's been going on with the Timberwolves for the last over a year now. Are you surprised that the Wolves ended up trading Karl Anthony Towns, their franchise player, in the middle of a contentious ownership dispute where, you might not know what the, potentially new ownership might want to do in that situation? Although the people who are trying to become the majority owners in that franchise are minority owners, so they're not necessarily that far out of alignment from current ownership with their ideas. But I just thought it was a pretty big move to make in the middle of, like, we don't know who's going to own this team in like a month,
It was a fascinating move when it did happen. It's one of those business of sports things that you don't necessarily fully appreciate in the moment. You're like, why did they trade Karl Anthony Towns to New York for Julius Randle and Dr. DiVincenzo? Are you sure that is the right call here? And especially from that financial perspective, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they fully understood the ramifications of the second apron and the ramifications of paying a whole bunch of money and not being able to put the best team around Anthony Edwards as possible. I think that they have a longer runway with Anthony Edwards, and this isn't just a thing where they need to capitalize right now. They need to be able to capitalize for the next 5 years. And it's kind of that vision that the Nuggets have tried to put out there by not necessarily re-signing KCP and instead going a different direction and trying to remain under the second apron themselves. We can hash that out at another time, I guess.
Yeah, but, I mean, Anthony Edwards is 23 and Nikola Jokic is 30, or almost 30.
Yeah, almost 30. He'll be 30 in 3 months?
Not 30 yet. I'm not gonna.
Yeah. So
actually, today's actually my birthday, and I just realized I am the same age as Nikola Jokic for a couple of months now. So.
Happy birthday, Grace.
Thank you. Did you say I deserve it?
Yeah, you deserve it. Yeah.
I deserve my birthday.
Yeah,
I deserve to be alive right now. Oh, man. That felt like a enjoy your food. Thanks, you too, to the waitress at the restaurant.
That's I'm the king of that. Have and enjoy your food. Thanks. You as well. As I drive away from the drive-thru. Thanks, guys. Absolutely. Happy birthday. You deserve everything that's coming your way.
Thank you. No, thank you. Not in the threatening way.
I can't help myself.
Oh, man. Okay, that's the news with the NBA. Let's move on to the Denver Nuggets. So I'm just going to give a quick rundown of the Nuggets' most recent Jokic-less road trip. They went 1-2 in this road trip. So in the first game against the New Orleans Pelicans, they lost 94-101. Dario started for Nikola Jokic, as he did in all 3 games. Aaron Gordon is still out, so Peyton Watson was starting at that 4 spot. In the game versus the Pelicans, the Nuggets starters got off to a good start with Dario, and you could kind of see the vision of him being able to be kind of a Jokic light in certain lineups. Then the bench came in with Zeke at backup 5, and the whole floor. And I'm not blaming like Zeke specifically for this, but obviously because of the importance of that center spot, everybody on the floor forgot how to play basketball, and Zeke ended up being a -15 in 5.5 minutes. The Nuggets tried to make a push in the second half, late second half, so they were playing Vlatko with the bench a little bit. But the second chance points in particular, I think just really killed him. And Jamal was getting blitzed relentlessly, and they created some open threes out of that, but nobody was able to make shots. Jamal got a little bit more aggressive late, and I thought that was pretty effective, getting to the rim, to beat those blitzes. And uh, that was nice, but too little, too late, and they ended up losing to the Pelicans. That was unfortunate because it was an NBA Cup game. They then played the Memphis Grizzlies on Sunday and lost 90-105. Again, the starters started off pretty well with Dario Saric at that 5 spot. Zach Edey comes in, and the complexion of the game changed entirely on both ends of the floor. They couldn't get into the paint. They couldn't make shots in the paint when they did get there. And defensively, like, no one could contain Edey in that first half. I actually thought DeAndre Jordan did a pretty good job on Edey in the second half of this game. And he ended up, I think, only losing his minutes by 2 in the second half as opposed to 8 in the first.
Right.
But yeah, Edey was like a whole problem. And really, after that happened, the Nuggets never really recovered, especially defensively. They got killed on the glass again, unsurprising given the major size disadvantage they had against the Grizzlies. I thought the transition defense was particularly bad in that game, just tons of runouts. Like, if there was a turnover, the Grizzlies were scoring just kind of automatically. But more importantly, I thought the offense was just atrocious. Like, the half court defense was fine. Transition defense was bad. Offense overall was like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
And after that game, everyone was like, is this even a basketball team? What's going on with Jamal Murray? I hope that UFC fight was worth it. All of this and that. And will they ever be able to win a game without Nikola Jokic ever again? Then they played Memphis last night, and they won 122-110. Starters off to a good start again with Dario Saric at that 5 spot. We actually got some Vlatko at the 5 minutes, and it was going pretty well in those non-Dario minutes, because now those are a thing. And particularly on offense, although there were some issues like boxing out on defense with that lineup. But then Vlatko went up for a dunk in semi-transition. It was like a really strong dunk, like finished really well. Then he came down, and clearly something was hurt in his knee. He went out in the game with a knee sprain, but we don't have an injury update on that quite yet. I thought MPJ and Jamal and Russ really gave them a lot of juice in that game. Edey didn't play, I think, because of the ankle sprain that he sustained in the previous game.
Yeah.
And it was a lot easier for really all of those guys to get to the rim. But especially in the case of Jamal, he was taking threes. And even though he wasn't making them, particularly in the first half, he kept getting to especially those open pull-up threes and kick-out threes that he would normally hesitate on. He was taking them. And then in the second half, they started falling, especially at crucial moments in the game as the Grizzlies were trying to mount a comeback. But I think the offense was really helped the most by the Nuggets just playing with pace. They tried to keep the game in transition as much as possible. And this was the highest paced game of the road trip, 112 possessions. So that was nice, and they looked engaged defensively. But Ryan, what did you think about, first of all, how the Nuggets performed overall on the road trip? Like, what do you think of going 1-2 without Jokic on the road? And yeah, what were your like major takeaways from the Nuggets over the course of this road trip?
Yeah, again, not really surprised that any of this happened. I think this was a pretty unsurprising road trip from Denver overall. Hey, not a surprise. Like, you struggle without Jokic. You struggle, like, especially when you don't have Aaron Gordon. I think that Gordon would have made a big difference in that first game, especially just because like they're going up against Yves Missi and Jeremiah Robinson Earl and Trey Jamison. And like they probably could have won that game had Aaron Gordon just been out there. He wasn't. They lost. It's unfortunate. Then the Memphis one was kind of a frustrating loss, one where the adversity hits and you kind of fold. And Jamal's the guy that you look at there, somebody who's supposed to be a leader on the team, somebody who you're wanting to accept responsibility in situations like that and bear the burden without Jokic. Michael Porter in that game also had 4 points through 3 quarters, and then looked pretty bad.
Yeah.
But again, I said after that one, I'm not worried about Mike. I'm worried about I'm worried about Jamal, and that looked prescient in the beginning of the third game, where yeah, Mike got off to a great start, but Jamal was looking pretty tentative. There were things that he was doing. He passed up some open threes. He jumped and tried to pass and turned the ball over
He
because
also missed the ones he was taking of the open
yeah,
threes
exactly. Like that,
early.
just looking uncomfortable. And then he fought his way through it and ultimately had a good game. There were some things that he was able to do in transition that I think you get to see the ball go in the basket, get to remember, hey, I'm a really good player. And suddenly you start to play like a really good player and then play like a great player at times. The ability of Russell Westbrook to set the table for both Jamal Murray and Michael Porter, I thought was on display. Jamal didn't have to do all the creation. Mike didn't have to do all the creation. But when they did create, they were in more advantageous situations than just where the defense was able to sit back, watch what Denver was doing, and
Yeah.
then blitz. Like there were a lot of good things that Denver was able to do, kind of getting some guys on the move a little bit more.
Yeah,
And I
for
thought that
sure.
Jamal and Mike played with purpose, and that was something that was missing in the first two games, was playing with an actual purpose and playing with intent. And I thought that they both answered the bell.
Yeah. And it helped that they were able to get to the rim and finish there easier because Edie was out for
Absolutely.
sure.
This is all contextual,
Especially
right?
Mike, who scored almost all of his points in the paint.
It was awesome. The only one that he
Um,
didn't, by the way,
yeah.
was the one where he had 2 feet on the 3-point line
Yeah.
because he's shooting 100% on those shots this year. That's just how he rolls. He is very comfortable from that 22 to 23 foot range.
That's basically that sweet spot for him, fortunately or unfortunately. One of my biggest takeaways from this road trip in terms of positives, especially with the young players, was Peyton Watson's defensive versatility. One because I lamented the defense throughout, especially the first two games of the road trip, but I actually thought he was pretty good
Yeah.
defensively in both of those games. Um, and he had to be at that starting four spot. I think he's been rebounding a little bit better now. It seems like there's been a little bit more emphasis placed on that, and
Let
that's
me ask you
really hard to do when you've got Dario as your starting five and you're like severely undersized in that front court as
yeah.
well.
Let
What
me
were
ask
you
you
gonna
this.
Mhm.
You just listed Peyton as the starting four. Like, do you consider him or Mike to be the four in these lineups? Because I've effectively moved him to the bigger position and
Mm.
Peyton to the smaller position in
Yeah,
my rotation
I
charts.
think that's where it comes to the defensive versatility. So for
Hmm.
example, in both Memphis games, there were several possessions where either one of Peyton or Mike was guarding Jaren Jackson Jr., for example, um, who was playing, well, depending on the lineup, 4 or 5.
Yeah,
And so we could just kind of list them both as combo forwards.
sure.
But
Fine with me.
in terms of four, I'm just like, well, what are they doing on the floor? Less so than even like offensively. I think one of the reasons that Mike's had more space to drive in and get to the rim, and really all but the second or the first Memphis game, because he was getting to the rim also on the Pelicans, which you should against a team that has no centers, is because he's able to drive into not a crowded paint. One of the things that I've been clocking with Mike this year is that he's sometimes taking threes where the drive is open because I think he's trying really hard to get the 3-point volume up. But a lot of those shots end up being better contested, particularly from his base when guys are chasing him, than I would like him to choose to take those shots as opposed to driving. But I thought in the second Grizzlies game, he was like, "Oh, okay, I'm just gonna get all the way to the cup here." Even though there were like I think one of the reasons he missed all his threes in that game is because all of them were like really well contested at the base and guys were chasing him. But
Yeah.
as soon as it kind of clicked for him that like, oh, okay, I can just get all the way to the rim here, like that is working. And part of that is because no AG there, nobody's in the dunker spot, for example. And that part of that is like Peyton's not necessarily playing the dunker either. So they're both kind of playing that combo forward position.
Yeah, and like just having that versatility is really important. It's something that the Nuggets didn't have as much last year in the playoffs because Peyton didn't really prove to be playable in those moments.
Mhm.
And I think it's going to be important for Denver to keep him engaged, keep him involved, and try to get Aaron Gordon at the 5 a little bit
Yeah.
more when he does come back. Like we're doing this backup center roulette right now when Joker's there. That like, hey, it might be Dario, it might be DeAndre Jordan. It's definitely not Zeke Naji, in my opinion, but it was Vlaco before he potentially hurt himself. I want to see Aaron Gordon stagger with the second unit and play some backup 5. Like that's when he does come back. I hope that physically, if he can handle it, if Denver can try to reduce his overall minutes load, that could really help. And the ability to have guys like Peyton Watson and Michael Porter Jr. be versatile combo forwards does really help in that. Like that's
Yeah.
the skill set that they should be trying to leverage, in my opinion.
Right. And against a really good Grizzlies rebounding team, to your point, Mike had 10 rebounds in the game yesterday, and they were like good, strong rebounds. Julian was a really good rebounder, I think, throughout this road trip, but especially in that third Memphis game. It felt like every rebound he grabbed was like heavily contested,
Yeah.
but he just has these like it's not just the rebounds, it's the loose balls as well. He has kind of like that Jokic like suction cup hands kind of situation where I feel like and he likes to dive for loose balls too, like when he's really engaged either defensively or offensively. Sometimes these result from some offensive or some messy offensive possessions. It's nice to see Julian like be such a hustle player and have the tools to actually, be able to turn that hustle into possessions. The other thing that stood out to me in this road trip was that despite some of Christian's struggles, particularly offensively, particularly shooting, his ability just to finish at the rim gave him such a floor. Like, I thought he had just a really bad game, both in New Orleans and the second Memphis game. I look up and he's got 12, 13, 14, 15 points just from finishing in transition and in the half court as well. Will and I talked about this when it comes to like Christian's cutting and all of that too. But I think that is like not appreciated, or it wasn't appreciated by me as much until I was watching this most recent Grizzlies game where I'm like, oh God, the shooting is just gone. For some reason, he's not shooting 50% from 3 anymore. But there are just these medium to high leverage sequences where you just need somebody to make their layup. And he does that. And he offensive rebounds. And there was that sequence where I was either Mike or Dario had blown the layup, and then Mike gets the offensive board, and then he misses the putback, and then Christian gets the offensive board and he gets that putback. And he's just I think that is very good. And I think that's part of the reason that he just excels offensively is because he's this high floor player, excels offensively with Jokic in particular and with the
Oh yeah.
starters, is that he's got this high floor and he's able to just like win some of those contests.
I've got a good stat for you here.
Mm-hmm.
So told you guys I would bring some numbers with me to the table. Christian has not shot below 42.9% from the field in any game this season. And that was a 3 of 7 game in I think the second or third or fourth game of the season, one of those where he just like didn't take that many shots and he only shot 3 of 7. That is so rare that I just went and looked up, okay, what's the longest streak of consecutive games so far for a field goal percentage above 42.5, like for any team this year, for any player this year. Daniel Gafford leads the league at 15, and he gets fed lobs.
Yeah.
Christian Braun is second.
Wow.
Christian Braun is second in the NBA, tied with Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Vucevic, and Domantas Sabonis at 13 games. And like that's what you're talking about here. It's the ability to finish. It's the ability to get to the rim and make those possessions count and be effective enough in those possessions that you're not losing out on these moments and these opportunities with him. Like he's making the most
The
of
opportunities.
the
Yeah.
opportunities that he does get.
Yeah.
And I would like him to continue to shoot more threes. He's over 0 for 2 in each of the last 3 games. I'm
Right.
looking at it now. He didn't make a 3 on this road trip, although he did have one in this last Memphis game where I think his foot was
Yes.
on the line. So I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
gonna,
They counted that one as I remember
yeah.
the shot. So I
Mhm.
was okay. So they counted that one as a 2.
I was wondering about that, so I had to go check it. But no, like he has been doing okay. He had a pull up 2 in this last game, and then looked like he's starting to look like a a frisky white boy playing for this particular team. It's he's been doing some crazy stuff. I've been pretty impressed with what I've seen from him, and like the consistency is what really stands out.
Yeah. I have to say I was a bit worried after the second or the first Memphis game, the second game of the road trip, because in both the Pelicans game and that Memphis game, it seemed like he was starting to hesitate on his 3-point looks again because they weren't falling.
Right.
And I thought in this last one, even though he didn't have a lot of attempts, and the one that he made was actually a 2, he was not hesitating on that shot again. And I thought that was really important because his confidence to just take that shot and like get, even if he's missing it, like give the team an offensive rebounding opportunity. There were times in the second game, in the first Memphis game, I should specify,
Yeah.
where he would pass up a 3 and then drive in and try to take a contested fadeaway midi. And I'm like, what is going on right now? So I did not want to see that again.
I'm okay with
um,
it if I'm being honest. And the reason why is like if you're talking about where like some of like okay, so here's the thing. If Jamal does that, you're like, okay, I'm glad Jamal's being aggressive. If Mike does
yeah,
that, I'm like, okay, I'm glad Mike is being aggressive. They didn't always shoot that well on those shots before, especially
yeah, but
Mike.
like, has Christian made one? Ever?
Well, he has now. He has now. That's for sure. But
He has
no,
that little like hook, that
mhm.
that right hook shot that is pretty good, but 15 feet out, Ryan,
It's
I was
not
not
great.
a fan.
It's not ideal, and I'm not gonna sit here and make a whole bunch of make a whole bunch of statements about it. But 10 to 16 feet looks like he's shooting 50% on the year. Only 37% from 3 to 10 feet. He doesn't take a lot of these shots, so I'm
Yeah,
not gonna
no,
sit
for
here
sure. It's
and
not like a
really
shot
bemoan it.
selection thing. It was more
Yeah,
like I'm worried about the fact that he hesitated on the initial shot
yeah,
more so than what he did afterward. So it was
and so
good to see him take the shots in the second Memphis game, even if he didn't make them, and one of them turned out to be a 2 anyway.
here's what I will say about that too.
Mhm.
When you're receiving a pass from Nikola Jokic, you know what to do with it.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what to do. When you're receiving a pass from Michael Porter or Jamal Murray or Dario Saric or any of these other guys, where it's like, okay, do I get this shot up now because that's my responsibility with the offense? Like it just feels right when Jokic is delivering you the ball, and then
Yeah.
you're like, okay, this is my time. And so I wonder if Joker comes back, we'll see a little bit less hesitation.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And after the first Memphis game, I was thinking, okay, we might see this again in the next one, but I really don't want to see it again when Jokic is back. So that's what I was going to be watching for. And I still will be, but I'm a little less worried now after he was shooting with more confidence in this last one.
Right.
Again, despite misses, and we saw this from both Christian and Jamal, right? Misses from 3 early in the game, and then Jamal was able to make some of those shots late. I actually thought the ones he was getting early were easier than the ones he was getting late, but he's a tough shot merchant a little bit.
Undoubtedly.
He needs the adrenaline.
Tough game, tough shot merchant. That's got to make sure he beats the allegations at some point, because like it would be nice if he just gets an easy 25 at some
Yeah.
point. That would be great, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it too.
I think the most important takeaway for me from this road trip is that Dario Saric can indeed still play basketball. And I think that really matters for the course of the regular season, particularly when you had Dario and Jamal on the floor. Those units looked at minimum coherent.
Oh yeah.
And versus, like, we talked about this in all 3 games, even in the losses, the starters would start off really well. And the starters are really just like, if we're not yet counting Christian as like a starter that's going to like carry a unit kind of starter, it's
Right.
really just Jamal and Mike. And then you've got Peyton, Christian, and Dario. And
Yeah.
those units were actually like pretty good in their minutes, especially to start all these games. And you're facing the Pelicans and the like incredibly injured Pelicans and the still like still figuring out what they are Grizzlies, who were also without Jaw in both of those games. But at minimum, you could say those units kind of like knew what they were trying to do, which is more than you can say for a lot of non-Jokic lineups.
Oh yeah. Like there's some things that you know are going to happen. You know that the non-Jokic lineups are going to figure out like, and they're going to struggle with their identity at least for the first 25, 30, 70 games of the season. And Denver will have to kind of go through some different machinations in order to find out the right stuff. But it was cool. It was cool to see Dario have some success. I got into a debate with Swipa about this last game from Dario. He didn't think that he played that great. I thought he was honestly great for much of it. And
About this most recent one?
yeah, honestly, like I thought the problem was that
What's
he
the
had the foul trouble.
debate?
What do you mean?
Wait, like what was Swipa's side of this? I missed this one.
Well, he was giving up some offensive rebounds and like not necessarily doing the right thing on the offensive end all the time. And
Oh, I'm
um,
sorry. Did he think that Zeke was going to give up fewer offensive rebounds? Or
I at this point I'm like I'm out. I'm out. Call me Mark Cuban.
I
Um,
did think that there were some issues boxing out, but again, they were a severely undersized lineup in all of their lineups, except, maybe if you had, even with DeAndre Jordan, you're undersized at the 4 versus a very good rebounding Grizzlies team. So while I do think there was particularly an effort issue on that side in the first Memphis game, I thought in this last one they did about as good of a job as you could expect until the very end
yeah,
of the game when the Grizzlies were trying to make their final push.
I'm not gonna lie. Like I think part of that also had to do with the fact that they were trying to get Russ a triple double. Like
Yeah.
not gonna lie. There was
Nope, we're
one
not
where
we're not gonna forget Russ trucking MPJ that led to the ball going out of bounds on the like fourth offensive rebounding attempt for the or offensive rebound for the Grizzlies on that possession that ended up in a Grizzlies 3. I was so mad about that, and I completely agree with you. I'm glad you brought it up because I wasn't even going to.
yeah, like look, I can see it.
They won the
Um,
game, but if they hadn't won the game, I like that would have been
it would
the
have been a
biggest
story.
storyline. We're going to talk a bit about how Russ affects some of these lineups as well, for better and for worse. But yeah, in terms of just the rebounding with that game and like Dario's role in that's like this is not a question for me.
I understand it. It's going to be interesting to see what they do going forward with that, but because like I still we'll talk about this obviously, but Russ plus Dario is still an awkward fit, and they're going to have to figure that out. But I honestly think they're both vets. They can figure it. Like they're adults. They can like if they both want success for the team and they both think that they can help the team, then they'll both find a way. So we'll find out.
Let's start when it comes to our excavation trip here through the
Hmm.
lineup data. Let's start with the nice things, the Jokic lineups. Okay. The first lineup I want to talk about is the main starters. So
Okay.
that is Jamal, Christian, MPJ, Aaron Gordon, and Jokic. This unit has played 232 possessions together, even with AG's absence, still one of the most used lineups in the NBA. Point 0.9 net rating, which is absurd.
Pretty good.
136.2 offensive rating, 117 defensive rating. And my main question for you when it comes to this lineup, Ryan, is one, why have the starters ended up being molten lava on offense this year, especially when everyone thought if they're going to be the same or better than last year, it's probably going to be defensively because of Christian's defensive versatility, but they'll probably lose some spacing without KCP. Complete opposite has happened. Is particularly sustainable given a well below average defensive rating for this lineup that would actually rank just do some quick maths here. That defensive rating would be last in the NBA this year. for the starters.
Yeah, so you're looking at the one that has 118 minutes. It's only played 5 games. I'm looking at it on NBA.com.
Oh, I
Um,
got this from Cleaning the Glass. So I've got
okay.
possessions. I've got 200 possessions.
I'll
Probably.
go to Cleaning the Glass
Oh,
too.
all
Let
right.
me
Okay.
navigate my way over there. I also am a subscriber and then love what Cleaning the Glass does and makes people smarter. And
They make
that's
pretty charts
yes,
and
they do.
just give me lots of data to dig into at my leisure to push certain agendas and and whatnot.
I like this number because on NBA.com it's plus 14.9. So plus
Okay.
18.9 when you
Even
eliminate
better.
garbage
Yeah.
time is better.
Yeah.
I big fan. So yeah, 97th percentile on offense, 18th percentile on defense. Uh, I think that in general, when you're talking about a lineup that has Murray, Brown, Porter, Gordon, and Jokic, there are going to be specific types of players that impact that lineup defensively. That like the quick guards are going to be difficult for Denver
Yeah.
to
That's been
handle. Some like some centers that are able to pick and pop is going to be an issue because Jokic is going to like to hang back in the paint or he's going to blitz. Those are going to be the two main coverages that Denver deals with. So Denver is actually going to get a really good test on that against New York when Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns come to town. So I'm curious to see how they handle it and if like I don't know if everybody's going to be back during that time. Like Aaron Gordon, I think has an outside chance of being back by that point. Jokic, he'll make the offensive lineups look really good. He has the greatest impact offensively in Cleaning the Glass history at this point. Like with
yeah.
what he's doing, his numbers look absolutely bonkers when you look at any offensive lineup that includes him. But the one below that too, that doesn't include Gordon and instead includes Peyton Watson.
Yeah.
Does that say 148.4
That
offensive
is
rating?
correct.
That's that I'm reading that correctly. That is very impressive, and it just goes to show that like once you get the formula down for hey, you get the 2-man game, but you get the spacing, you get the running, you get the athleticism, you get the transition, like everything starts to look pretty good.
It's been a lot less two-man game, even to close these games, or at least in the way that we're used to in terms of the spread pick and roll. But we saw versus in the Toronto game in Toronto, they closed in regulation with operating off of an empty side, and Jamal was able to make that reverse layup on that last possession to tie the game. But we haven't been seeing as much super effective spread pick and roll. And I think they've gone away from it a bit because of that. And it hasn't been as effective, I think, because of the spacing for Jamal. But these lineups are still kicking ass.
Yeah, like
So
hey,
that's my question is like, what's going on here? Is it because AG and now and Christian also have been shooting well, at least on average over a 50% from three? Um, can that explain everything with like these particular lineups? And like again, like how worried are you like that defensively these lineups are like kind of
they're
trash?
kind of trash, but I also sort of feel like Denver's still surprisingly like 11th in
Yeah.
defense on the season, and it's still pretty early in terms of
They're climbing up there.
what to
I use
do.
dunks and threes because I like, especially early in the season, trying to adjust for schedule. And Denver has been slowly climbing up there. They were 22nd at one point, and then they were like hovering at 19th for a few games. Now they're at 14th. I think the last two Memphis games have really helped that because the Grizzlies haven't really been able to score that well.
Yeah,
Um, they can't shoot. But before
exactly.
that, it was looking really, really rough.
In terms of Denver's offense, I'm just looking at some numbers here. They're shooting 44.5% basically on corner threes, 6% higher than the rest of the NBA. And I think if you look at Denver's roster and look at who they have, you don't really expect that to hold. It's
Yeah.
only 83 shots, so it's not like it's going to
Yeah.
be this massive effect. And what
Right. They
Denver
don't take
mostly
a lot
does
of
is in the
corner
middle
threes.
of the floor and on cuts and on above the break threes. Like they've shot they shot 83 corner threes so far and 365 above the break threes. So like that's actually no, that's Dallas. Excuse me. They've shot 330
Yeah.
above the break threes. So this is like they're going to be fine as long as they keep hitting threes. But that's one of the factors here is that you have to understand is that Aaron Gordon, he was hotter than the sun at the beginning of the season before getting hurt. I don't expect him to shoot above 40% going forward. And I don't really expect Christian Braun to shoot above 40% going forward. I think that that'll come down eventually and into that like 36 to 38 range. But I also kind of expect Jamal to be a lot better shooting the ball, and Mike is who he is. What about Nikola? Where do you expect his 3-point shooting to be at?
Not at 56%.
What? What? Grace.
I think he'll probably end up somewhere around, because the shot like looks a lot more comfortable. I think that he's actually worked on the base. It's a lot more consistent
Yeah.
now. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up somewhere between, I'll be generous and say 38 to 42% from three. But he's shooting like crazy right now.
Yeah, that certainly helps shooting higher than what he normally shoots as well. Dario's lower, so maybe he comes up a little bit. Peyton's higher, so like I don't know if that's player development or if that's like shooting above his standard. Julian Strother, I think, was like 38% at this point. So that's about where I would expect him to be based off of the kind of shooter that people think that he is. I don't know whether he's actually that or not, but some of the threes that he was hitting look pretty pure.
Yeah. This road trip for sure, where we had a lot of everybody breaking really, but particularly I think it hurt with Christian because he was actually making he'd been making so many
Yeah.
that dropped us from second in 3-point percentage as a team to six. Obviously also not without Jokic, our best 3-point shooter
Yeah.
on the team as well. But
Here's
it would be nice if they could hover around that like 7 to 4 range,
yeah. Here's
in
another
terms of
factor I'll
efficiency.
say is the free throw shooting.
Yes. Yeah.
It's something that Denver's never once had under the Jokic era, where like you could say, oh yeah, we're getting to the free throw line and we're making enough free throws to really make it count. Now they're only 20th in percentage right now, just on the season, but and that to me is more indicative of what they are as a 3-point shooting team, if I'm
Mm.
being honest. So we'll see whether
They were
whether
better. They were an awful free throw shooting team last year, though, and they were kind of a slightly above average 3-point.
yeah,
Uh,
so like I mean, I think that they'll eventually get to kind of below average in both of those categories. But if they can make up for it in some volume, like just
mm,
getting to the free throw line is way more important than how many you're actually making. So
yeah.
I do think that like they're fourth in attempts, they're third in makes. They're doing a really good job of like the in terms of free throw rate, they are sixth, and so like that's something that they've never had before. And like Jokic especially is affecting some of those things. He is helping them get to the free throw line, whether that's Christian Braun crashing on cuts, whether that's Michael Porter ducking in, whether that's Jokic himself just getting fouled on putbacks, things like that. Like there's a lot to like about what the team is doing from a free throw shooting perspective, and I think that's really helping them surprisingly much.
Yeah, I completely agree on that. That was never like they were. I mean, last year, I just want to grab this because the free throw rate skyrocketed this year. Last year, they were 25th in free throw rate. And up until this road trip, they were first.
Yeah,
So I think Jokic coming back and the offense kind of getting back to what it was will probably get that back up. I think the fact they're playing with so much pace and how Russ is pushing pace and all that in transition too is a big part of it.
undoubtedly.
Just getting more opportunities to catch defenses off out of position.
And like Jokic loves to push that tempo. Like he'll throw the ball ahead as often as he
Yeah.
possibly. That to me is perfectly understandable. But he carries a heavy burden, and anytime that Denver can get some free throws and slow that game down, but play fast while the game is going on, like that is the right pacing that they should be trying to achieve.
So we talked about the lineup where Peyton is in for AG while he's been out with his calf strain. Another lineup that they played a lot while Jamal was in his concussion protocol was basically the starters without Jamal. So Russ in there for that point guard spot. Or was it one game? I guess it was the second half of the Wolves game because Jamal got the concussion early, and then the Jazz game. That lineup is a plus 32.2 in 71 possessions. the part that I wanted to highlight about it was the 88.9 defensive rating. Now it's not even 100 possessions, and most of the lineups that we're talking about um, won't have that much burn, especially because of how much the starters play together, and also how much various starters have been out. But this one really stood out to me because Russ is a completely different kind of player than the Jamal, and you can kind of see that in the strength of this unit is really more on the defense, even though the offense is still really good. What do you make of that, and that being a potential tool, not just as the season goes on, but potentially even in the playoffs? Because I've been racking my brain trying to figure out which of the data on Russell Westbrook I actually trust.
Yeah, I'm looking at that one, and I'm looking at the one right below it that includes Peyton instead of AG.
Yes,
And I'm
yes.
thinking back to those moments and what Denver was actually doing. There are some good moments where Russ was, I think, against the Timberwolves, like immediately replacing Jamal in those moments. AG was still out there. Denver was running that. I think they closed with that group at one point. They also did it against the Jazz, which, I mean, it's hard to really take too much lineup data against the Jazz that seriously. And then it was for the first few minutes against Toronto. So I don't know how much to value that in a small sample.
Yeah,
Not all of it came from those games. And I think that the ones with Peyton, which it looks drastically different, right?
drastically.
It looks like, so you've got the minus
16.
16.2
That's right.
in those minutes on basically the same number of possessions. So I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of those two samples. It's probably like a plus 16, a plus 15 that they can go to. And like, because I think we saw that with Denver last year where they had Reggie and Christian come in, and then you had Mike, AG, and Jokic, I believe. And that lineup last year was really good in kind of the middle to end of the first and third quarters. And like that was a surprising one that they're really propped up Reggie's plus minus in particular. So
Mhm.
it's just those looks where you get that nice little change up right in the middle of the first and third quarter that I
Right.
think Denver can definitely go to. And like they should try that. They should absolutely do it.
So, just to your point about the difference when it's Peyton, I was trying to figure out about like what is the difference between the good lineups with Russ and the bad ones in terms of net rating.
Mm.
Um, so Russ with Peyton is in terms of a two-man pairing is minus 18 net in 371 possessions. So it's pretty big sample size.
Yeah.
Without Jokic, it's obviously worse, minus 25.3 in 215 possessions. Well, Jokic fixes a lot. Jokic has actually been able to make, even we're about to talk about this, the 2 point guard look, at least okay. Without Jokic, or sorry, with Jokic, Russ and Peyton is at 156 possessions. And I was trying to find lineups that had Russ and Peyton together that were positive or near positive. And the only one that had even 10 possessions together was Jokic, Peyton at the four, Julian, Christian, and Russ. And it was literally like 10 possessions.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And the reason for that is like I remember those looks. It was, I think they used it in the OKC game. I think they used it in the
Mm,
Clippers game, like the first two games of the season, where
yeah.
Denver was trying to figure out what basketball was again. That was a pretty ugly time for the Nuggets. The offensive rating on that one is pretty
Do,
bad.
do you think we'll just get a bigger sample and maybe perhaps unfortunately confirmation of that pairing being bad once AG is back and Peyton is moved back to the bench? Because right now, obviously, I think a lot of people talked about how Christian and Peyton would both receive a positive benefit from Christian moving to the starting lineup because you have less of their minutes together where they're operating in kind of like similar areas on the floor
Yeah.
most of the time. And Christian's obviously playing a lot more on the perimeter now anyway. But now with AG out, you're separating Peyton and Russ a little bit more too. We even saw in the game yesterday, Malone ends up subbing Peyton out for Russ at the end of the game. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I understood
You know why.
what he was going for.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
part of it was because he was setting the table really well on the offensive end, and then the ball
Yeah.
just ended up in Jamal's hands anyway. Which that's funny. But they got the 10th rebound. That was important. Jokic, one of Mike or Christian Braun, Peyton Watson, Russell Westbrook, Julian Strawther. Like those three off the bench, and then one starter,
Yeah.
and then Jokic. I think that will end up being a really good group for Denver for them to go to on a consistent basis.
It was
Uh,
just really rough in the first 2 games.
yes, absolutely. And so,
Versus
like,
2 really good defensive teams. Like, everyone thought the Clippers were gonna suck this year, but I said they'd be a good defensive team, and they were, and they really gave Denver a lot of issues, particularly in the first half of that game. And obviously OKC was like, let's be generational.
they're by far the best defensive team in the NBA right now. The Clippers are 7th, but by the
Magic are catching up. I just want to point that out.
oh yeah,
Now
hey,
that Chet is out.
look at that, look at that. They can still do it, but no, I think in general there's always, when I'm doing lineup stuff, there's always problems with small sample size that you have
Yeah.
to continue to ask your question.
Yeah.
Okay, do I actually think that this is going to sustain? What are some factors on both sides that could really be affecting things in one way or the other? And what is most likely to continue to happen? And so I think that with Denver, Russ is now starting to figure out how to fit in with this group a little bit more. Jokic is obviously Jokic. I can consider him probably continuing to be Jokic. And I just think that Peyton Watson has turned a corner.
The other set of lineups that we really have to talk about, because they were instrumental in getting Denver what I think was their best win of the season versus OKC, but they played in other games as well, was these no point guard looks, particularly where you have Jokic and MPJ and what have been dubbed the Booth Boys by Nuggets Nation in Christian Braun, Julian Strawther, and Peyton Watson. So that particular pairing where it's Jokic and MPJ with those guys, plus 54.5 and only 44 possessions. The reason that I find this sustainable, or at least close to it, like I think this is going to be a really good lineup, not necessarily like molten lava, because I have a 154 offensive rating.
That seems pretty good.
Is in watching the games versus the Heat and the Thunder. Actually, not the Heat, but the Thunder and the
Raptors,
played
right?
before, the Raptors, yeah, is where we saw a lot of these lineups. They were so good defensively, and they rebounded really well, and it was just like a pretty big lineup, even though you don't have AG out there. I'm actually curious what this would look like with AG there instead of MPJ, because the spacing definitely changes, or maybe AG instead of Julian if you want to, keep MPJ on the floor.
Ooh.
But then you lose a
Christian
different kind of ball handler.
Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Michael Porter, Aaron Gordon, Jokic.
He's been playing point in those looks, and then the offense was basically Jokic post ups, Christian cutting in from the weak side to open up that space. Will did a really great video on Christian's slot cutting in that series, and how you could in that series of possessions versus OKC, and how you can deal with limited spacing on the floor where you have Christian and Peyton as non-shooters in that look. But defensively they were just excellent, and this is another example of Christian or Peyton's defensive versatility. They were doing a lot of Peyton on Chet, Peyton switching onto SGA, to just like muck everything up for the other team. Now, my question here, even though I believe that this is going to be a really effective lineup, is it too early to do the victory lap on the Booth Boys because it's so few possessions? Or do you believe in like what I see with in terms of the eye test here?
I think everybody's going to look really good with Jokic. That's one thing that we have to fully understand about this. But in particular, Christian is somebody that people should be doing a victory lap on right now. Julian Strawther, there's still some things to worry about. There's still some things to think about. Peyton Watson, 2-point shooting actually hasn't been that effective. So that's something that I'm thinking about and trying to figure out, okay, where does he fit into this on the offensive end? How does he continue to attack and stay engaged if the three-pointer is not falling? So that's something that I'm still monitoring and still is a potential barrier in the playoffs. But
yeah,
I do think that Christian in particular, like he's going to play. Like he's going to play 30 plus minutes a night in the playoffs. And anybody that
He's
said that,
playing 30 plus minutes a night now.
yeah, I
Like
mean, that's what I'm
40
saying. It's
minutes
like
some
he's
games.
35, 38, 40. Like the dude has been a metronome. He's been a rock for Denver, and he's been very stable. And like that, I didn't think that he would be the second most consistent player on the team, but here we are.
Yeah, for better or worse.
Like,
It's not great
yeah,
reasons, but
that's fair.
it's good that he has been that.
Yes, like it
Um
saved them a lot.
the one I wanted to point out was actually a different rollout of Jokic with the Booth boys where you've got Russ in instead of MPJ. This lineup only had 35 possessions and it's a plus 1.8. Um so, not as kill you. The defensive rating is pretty good. The
Yeah.
offensive rating is mediocre. I just wondered what you thought of that difference. Again, small sample size, but it's interesting how big of a difference it makes to have, obviously Russ out there over your starting small forward in FPJ.
Yeah, definitely part of it. Um, I look at the EFG. They're not making a bunch of shots there. I look at the free throw rate. They're
Yeah.
53.8% free throw rate with that. That's insane. Propping it up a little bit. So
Okay.
I would say that
Probably
probably not
not.
something that I would go to on a consistent basis and feel really good about. But that doesn't mean that it can't
Another
happen.
Russ plus Peyton lineup, actually, now that I'm
Yeah.
thinking about
Yeah, I
it.
mean that's one sort of kind of rhythm that you're going to have to figure
Interesting.
out. It's are they going to be able to impact things? Now, I will say that if Christian is shooting, if Julian is shooting, and those guys are accurate and players that the team has to respect, they're obviously going to respect Jokic. So Russ and Payton could probably get away with it. You don't always need 4 or 5 shooters in every lineup. Like
No, definitely
that's
not.
definitely something that the Nuggets can figure out, and especially like with the way that Russ is now starting to cut off of Jokic, that can free some things up too. So I don't necessarily think it's impossible that that lineup can work, but I'm seeing some danger signs.
Yeah.
That's something that I would monitor.
I do want to just point this out because I think it's relevant and it's not to pick on Russ. It's really more about Russ's fit with some of these best lineups. Like if we're in terms of trying to maximize some of these players. So I have just a list of the best two-man net ratings on the team. Unsurprisingly, Jokic and Jamal plus 19.4. Crazy. Jokic and Christian plus 15.6, Jokic and MPJ plus 18.8. And a lot of those are like those guys playing with multiple other starters.
Yeah.
Um, Jokic and Peyton is actually a plus 14.4. And Peyton's been playing a lot more in the starting lineup recently. But Jokic plus Peyton without Russ is a plus 36.4.
Something to
Then
monitor.
Jokic and Julian is plus 7. And Jokic and Julian without Russ is plus 13.6.
Hmm. I will have to keep an eye on that. That's something that I do think that the end of that Toronto game where they went on a great run and it looked awesome and everybody's cheering and
Mhm.
yay, that's definitely something where you play that out multiple times and you play out multiple situations against better teams. Like what is
Yeah,
Toronto's record even? Like it's probably
right.
not that good. I do think
It's
that
not. They're tied with the Sixers for the worst record in the NBA, I
oh,
believe.
what a shame, Philly. But no, I do think that if Denver were to play that lineup against Boston, it probably goes a little bit differently. And
Boston is definitely a different beast.
yeah, but like fortunately, there aren't that many Bostons or OKCs or teams like that out there. So Denver can get away with it against most teams. They just have to.
Yeah.
It may not be awesome going forward.
Yeah. No, completely agree. And I'm glad I'm taking notes on this now because we can sort of monitor,
Yeah,
how some of our favorite, pet lineups have been progressing throughout the season. And there are lineups, as we're about to talk about, without Jokic that have gotten less bad
hey,
as the
that's the
season
right monitor
progresses.
for it as well.
So actually, right, I took a bunch of these numbers before last night's Grizzlies game, and then I went back and I actually just kept the old numbers to see how much just that win over the Grizzlies helped. One of the first ones was just the Nuggets net rating without Jokic. was minus 21.2 net before that Grizzlies game, and now they're only a minus 14. So
Look at that.
that is progress. Okay. The first lineup we have to talk about is the one that the first sort of major bench lineup that the Nuggets rolled out with to start the year, and that was Russ, Julian, Peyton, MPJ, and Dario. They played 48 possessions. This was over the first 2 or 3 games. I know Malone started to tinker with the bench really after that first game, but Dario and Russ basically were anchoring the bench for the first 5 games of the season. This lineup was a minus 76.5 net. uh,
Impressive, honestly.
it was yeah, I called it the death lineup because it was killing us.
Ah.
It is 60 offensive rating, 60.4, and then a 137 defensive rating. I know what we played those first 2 games against what ended up being like at least an okay team in the Clippers, pretty good defensive team, and then obviously OKC, who were the best team in the NBA at that point. But this lineup did play through a couple more games anyway, and it was just not going well.
I do want to make one
Go ahead.
correction here. They
Yeah.
in the first game of the season, they used Jamal as the stagger, and they used
In the first game?
yes,
Okay. Okay.
Jamal, Russ, Dario. They used Julian at the 3 and Peyton at the 4.
And Peyton. Okay, I have that one here too, and
And
that one was less bad.
Yeah, it was bad. It was
But it was
bad enough
still
that
bad. It was
Malone
bad
was
enough that they changed things
like,
up
they
and then it
changed it.
got
And then it
worse.
got worse. So that was what really happened over the
Yeah.
course of those next 2, 3, 4 games was that they're like, yeah, you know what? We're gonna try to get Mike out there. We're gonna get Russ to play as the main point guard, somebody that can do things, and then Dario is the DHO guy. And it was about as horrible as it could be. It doesn't mean that it can't get better, but like
Yeah.
I honestly think that if we're talking about it, I think that they should go back to that one when everybody gets healthy.
So that lineup, like they played in preseason. I couldn't find preseason lineup data because Cleaning the Glass doesn't do that. And
Yeah.
actually, NBA.com didn't have preseason lineup data either. But I just remember watching the bench in preseason and thinking, okay, I know, I know what this group is trying to do. And of course, that's versus preseason defenses, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. But the thing that really stood out to me about this lineup, just watching the games, was like, man, Dario could not make a layup.
Yeah.
And that's really tough. That would explain the 60 offensive rating for, relatively limited set of possessions. But it just seemed like, we even see it in the difference between, like you said, they were using Jamal as a stagger in the first game and then changed it over to Mike after that, and it got worse. But we've seen over the course of this road trip that for some reason, whether Russ is on the floor or not, having Jamal out there with Dario makes those line. I mean, and Jamal is a good player, as it turns out. Like he can make a lineup better. But particularly that pairing of like Jamal with Dario on that bench seems to make a major difference, whether it's just making a lineup less bad or actually turning it into something positive. So what do you think about that?
I'm curious to see how it evolves going forward. I have long thought that Jamal and Dario would be a good fit
Mm.
because of Dario's ability to run the DHO, to pick and pop, and to be in the spaces that Jokic is usually in on the offensive end. It's going to be a sense of familiarity for Jamal. And they never really got to that in that first game because they were playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, the best perimeter
Who don't let you play the
in
way
like
that
the
you want to play.
generation. Like absolutely, like they were unbelievable. So
Yeah.
and then they immediately went away from it. And I understand why they did it, but I also can say here and say that like I like what Russ and Jokic have done overall with when they're out there, and I kind of like what Jamal and Dario can do. And at least the theory of the practice is pretty good. I don't know if it'll ultimately look that great going forward, but if we're trying to come up with different ways for the bench and for different lineups to be successful, that's one that I think they could try. Now, do you go with Jamal, Russ, and Dario? Like that's where you really start to have some
So
questions.
I've got some great comparisons for you on that.
Great.
So 2 lineups here. The one that we just talked about, which was, I think, just the one that they played in that first game versus the Thunder. Russ, Jamal, Julian, Peyton, and Dario. Maybe they played it like briefly in some other game, just kind of by the way of things staggering. If you replace, let's see, Peyton with MPJ and Julian with Christian, so you putting two more starters out there, of course.
Yeah.
That turns into a plus 10.5. And that's Dario with 2 point guards. Now, I don't know which games they played those together in. I'm sure it happened over the course of this road trip at one point. But that lineup has a 138 offensive rating. The defense is, let's not talk about that.
Not worried about that yet.
But I have some more, I have my question here is were we wrong about the 2 point guard lineup in that it could never work?
I didn't ever think that it could never work. That's
okay.
That's an important distinction there. A lot of folks were like, this will never work. This will never happen. I'm always wanting to see something before immediately writing it off if I can possibly. And then I saw it that first game and I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. But it just is about the different situations and the different ancillary pieces. Can you get an elite off-ball shooter in the forward spot like a Michael Porter? Or is it going to be kind of shaky with Peyton Watson? I think that makes a big difference in some of those configurations. Now, you can't always put all of your starters with the bench and then expect that, okay, yeah, the bench is going to be great at that point, but then you don't have time for the starters to rest. And you're going to get these 36 to 38 minute games from all these guys, and they got to figure that out. But I do think that, like, could you get Aaron Gordon out there with Dario Saric? Could you get Jamal and Russ and AG and Saric, and then maybe have Julian Strawther out there as another floor spacer? Like, I could see that working. I could see Mike.
And they've been trying so many things this season.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people thought it's just going to be the same old thing in which in that they only try one bench the entire. I mean, it was necessitated by, first Jamal's absence and then AG's absence with his injury. But like you mentioned, it was after that first game versus the Thunder, they were already like, okay, we got to rework this bench. And it feels like they've been trying different things every single game. Like we got Vlatko at the 5 lineups over the last 2 games in Memphis, and he hasn't been playing.
I give Michael Malone a ton of credit. Like, honestly, he catches a lot of flack from different sects of Nuggets fans that like don't necessarily appreciate what he does and what he means to the group. And they don't think he's that creative. And I don't think he was in situations these last couple of years where he had to be creative. Like he kind of knew the bench was going to suck this last year. Like that was going to be a thing. Like there weren't a lot of reasons to believe otherwise, but I do think that this year, when you get in Russ and you get in Dario, you get in players that have been successful in other areas. And like Russ was previously a starter or a 6 man in his last couple stops. And obviously he's at a little different place in his career now, but still has some juice. Like there's no doubt about it. And then Dario.
Sometimes too much juice.
Yeah, sometimes maybe so. But it does feel like they're like the weapons are a little bit better this year. Like Peyton's a little bit more refined. Christian's more refined, obviously. Julian Strawther's a little bit more settled down. And having different players that you can go to in those cases, it allows you to be a little bit more flexible. Well, hey, now we can play some starters with the second unit, and hopefully that actually makes some sense.
Yeah. I wanted to just talk a little bit more about these 2 point guard looks, because they have improved over the course of this road trip. The Russ and Jamal lineups are actually, after that Memphis win, they went from plus 0.4 to plus 3.7 on the season, that's a big leap without Jokic, right? So because I had most of these numbers before this last game, and then looked them up after that win. And then before the last game in Memphis, they were a plus 6.5 net with Dario Saric. Now they're a plus 3.6, so got a little bit worse. So
that's okay. That's still like in the positive realm. So like
when you're talking about like Jokic isn't on the floor, like I will take anything below minus 10.
Yeah, at this point, like that's how you got to view it. And if Denver has different configurations that they can go to, that's going to help them. It's obviously will help them. So for those 2 point guard looks, I like the idea of Russ setting the table for Jamal or setting the table for Jamal and MPJ. And then you kind of play around with that and you see what it looks like. And maybe Dario can orient some things. Do you think that Dario's the right center for those particular groups?
So I looked at, again, just basing on lineup data, we don't have a ton with the other centers is the
Yeah.
thing, because they, in that time that Dario was out of the rotation, they were trying so many different things. What I do know is that Zeke is not the answer. That's what I
Yeah.
know for
Yeah.
sure.
I feel very confident about that as well.
One of the things, I'll throw this question at you because, because we're on it with the centers, but were there combinations that surprised you in how good or how bad they were, whether it was 5-man, 2-man, 3-man, whatever rotations where you're like, or lineups where you're thinking, I just don't think this could work, or vice versa. You're like, this should work, but it's not working.
Not really. I think it's still very early to try to figure out what those combinations are going to look like.
Yeah.
I will say that with Christian and Jamal, like I kind of thought that was going to be a really good combo for Denver. And when those two share the floor together, it's a plus 14.8 with or
Oh,
without
yay.
Nikola Jokic.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's a good one. I did not have that one on my list, right?
I thought that like Jamal's talked about this honestly. Like he wants, like he's been very forthright about wanting Christian to be a runoff, about wanting him to be somebody who can be trusted and to do things and to empower him to continue to be as dynamic as he can be and try stuff. And I think that really helps. So you add Jokic to that mix, like, hey, shocker, it's going to go higher. But Jamal, Christian, and Joker, when they are out, there's a plus 20.7 in 392 possessions. So, like, that is just like what Jamal, KCP, and Joker were doing. So I don't think
Yeah.
there's any question as to whether Denver can win a championship with that particular mix, or if at least get to the postseason with that particular mix and be very, very successful. There will be some playoff questions to be sure, but I do think that Christian he's fully acquitted himself at this point.
The last just specific lineup I wanted to talk about was one that they used quite a lot over the course of this road trip. They actually used it almost 30 more possessions just in the last Grizzlies game. So this is a 3-starter stagger where, well, now Peyton's a starter temporarily, but
Sure.
this is what they've been starting with, which is Jamal, Christian, Peyton, MPJ, and Dario. That group has played 78 possessions together, and they're a plus 18. And they went from a plus 4.7 to a plus 18 after this most recent Grizzlies game. This is the thing, is like this starting group over the course of this road trip has gotten off to great starts every single game, and then some other like thing shows up. The team like has issues, whether it's like rebounding or like hustling and like keeping it up and all of that. But that group has been able to like get off to good starts.
I will
And the
say,
thing that,
like,
oh, go ahead.
let me stop you there, unfortunately, because
Yeah.
it's only a 93 offensive rating. Like,
Yes. So the thing
what
that
has
stands out to me is the defensive rating, is what I was going to say next, because the offense is not great. And
that that is one.
it went from an 86 to a 75. That's the thing, is like, I wonder, when you're looking at lineup data, which numbers do you tend to trust more, the offensive or the defensive number? And does it just depend?
I think they're all I don't trust any of them
Okay.
until I see them for a longer period of time
Yeah.
against not the Memphis Grizzlies.
Right.
Because I think that Memphis, despite the fact that they've shown some good things,
They
like
can't shoot.
they do not strike me as a trustable shooting unit.
Yeah.
So that's one where
This
I'm
is like an
definitely
issue that I
monitoring.
had with Taylor Jenkins last year, because I feel like he tried to turn them into a high volume 3-point shooting team. And I'm
Yeah.
like, God, like they can't do, they're better this year because they're attacking the paint more, but they're still like doing a lot of drive and kick. And if you kind of let the bad shooters shoot, then you'll probably be okay.
Now, what I will trust is that Christian shut down Desmond Bain. Like, he was in his shirt the entire time and doing what he could to make him uncomfortable. And I trusted the effort that they brought in this last
Mm,
game. Like Jamal,
yeah.
Christian, Peyton, Mike, Jokic, or not Jokic, Dario. They knew that they had to get it done, and the effort that they brought forth really showed up on the defensive end. So I was glad to see it.
Yeah.
That translates. If you're looking for a lineup that can give you good minutes on the defensive end, it can include Jamal and MPJ. You just have to make sure that
And
those guys
Dario.
and Dario. It just means that they have to play hard, and
Yeah.
they can. They showed it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I'm curious if they, when everybody's healthy, whether we, see this lineup again in some kind of non-Jokic unit. Um, was there anything over the course of either this road trip or earlier in the season, because we talked about how much they've been experimenting? Is there anything that the coaching staff surprised you with? Where you're like, oh, didn't see this coming. This
Hmm.
is interesting.
Not really. And
Okay.
I do think that closing without Russ and closing with the Booth boys in both of those games against the Raptors and the Thunder, that's one that I would highlight and say, you know what? That was impressive. That was something that especially when Russ had played pretty well in each of those games, Michael Malone trusted the development process. He trusted the ability to space around Jokic and have tall, athletic shooters and defenders that could really do a variety of things out there on the floor. And then they paid him back. And that's one that if I'm looking back at any moment in this year so far, and then like the most valuable moments that Denver has actually had, it's that Raptors game and that Thunder game.
Yeah.
Because they were the ones where, yeah, it goes the other way, and you're feeling really ugly about what this season is looking like right now. Because Denver's what, 8-5? They would be 6-7 if they lost both of those games, and they're well within their right to lose both of those games. But getting young guys to play in disadvantageous situations, high pressure situations, and then to show up in back-to-back games is a really big deal.
Yeah, completely agree. One of the lineups that did definitely surprise me, and we talked about it or before on the show, maybe last episode. Uh the Peyton slash Russ, however you want to look at it, at 5 lineups that we saw, particularly versus the Heat.
Yeah.
But I do believe they broke it out again versus Memphis
Mm.
in the second half of that game after, Vlatko got hurt. And I was expecting DJ to come back in the second half, and he did not. And I was like, okay, I guess there's no Edie, but what's going on here? But that lineup was actually pretty good. Like in that they survived. I don't
Yeah.
have the lineup data on this. It's such a small set of possessions, but we talked about versus the Heat how important it was to get a lineup of all 5 guys who have some level of court awareness out there to bust the Miami Heat's zone.
Yeah.
But were you surprised by that? Like, that's a really small lineup for them to go to, and kind of risky, especially on the glass, right?
Not surprised at all that they decided to do it. If I'm being honest, I thought that this was a good sign. I'm looking at some of the numbers now. The ones with Christian in there instead of Julian were not as good for whatever reason. Like because Denver actually did pretty well in those. Actually, I'm looking at 13 possessions with Christian out there, Peyton Watson at the 4 or 5, and then Michael Porter at the other spot.
Mm-hmm.
184 offensive rating, 200 defensive rating. I don't think it's sustainable, Grace. I really don't.
They were scoring every time because they knew how to like bust the Heat zone. But yeah,
I think it's okay. And like, look, there will be times when you can break that back out and see what happens with it. But like, it just goes to show if you don't trust a center, then you don't have to use one. It's not a requirement. Denver can, in certain situations, go with a small group. Mike is already 6'10" and is a good rebounder. Peyton is already a good rim protector. You can find ways. Other guys just have to help rebounding.
Yeah, for sure. Gang rebounding, very, very important. Um, do I want to call this my last question? I'll call it my last question before we get to the last segment. How many minutes have Zeke and Dario played together this season?
I'm going to say 2 minutes. I don't think that they've played a ton.
There are 0 possessions logged in cleaning the glass with Zeke and Dario. Maybe they played in garbage time and it got filtered out.
That is probably what it is, because they were down 25 and they're like, you know what, let's do this. That's interesting. That's not surprising to me, because I don't think that Zeke has really earned the opportunity to play. But
Well, he's played at the 5 a ton, and that's definitely been the worst of the non-Jokic, just center minutes. Like, we talked about how rough it was for Dario earlier on. Actually, all of these numbers are before, like, the last Memphis game, but Dario had some good minutes in the rest of the road trip.
right.
He's, minus 9.3 in over 250 possessions. Zeke has been a minus 44.3 net on the floor without Jokic or DJ, or Dario. I was looking to filter out, like, this is the sole center on the floor.
Yeah.
That is by far the worst. DeAndre Jordan has actually had, minus 7.4, like, survivable, except that he's 36 and he just can't do that every night.
Yeah.
In just under 100 possessions. But it's interesting to me because, just watching the game in Memphis yesterday, we tried so many different center options in that game. We had some Zeke minutes, we had some Dario minutes, we had some Flacco at 5 minutes. Or I don't know if we had Zeke minutes yesterday, but we did in the previous game. I need to think about that.
There were just very brief ones in between the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And like you would expect, they were bad.
In the second half.
They were bad.
Yes. And it was just different. Like, there's like bad but survivable, and then there is just, this just does not work. And part of that is, like, Zeke, has his limitations as a 5. But we talked about how there haven't even been Zeke with Dario minutes. And part of that is because you just want to play your better players more. And it's opened up, like, okay, whether Peyton wants to play 4 or not, he gets to be on the floor more if he's playing that position. We get more of MPJ at the 4 and get to see what he can do in that position with that kind of spacing offensively, what he can do defensively in that position as well. And so it just kind of leaves me wondering, like, what is it that we can do with Zeke? Same. Okay.
Honestly, like, here's the thing. I don't think you can develop everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that Denver has made a commitment to Julian Strawther, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson. When he comes back, they will make a commitment to Deron Holmes. I think that they like Vlatko. We'll see what happens with this injury news and what it's going to look like going forward. But it's unfortunate. They gave Zeke what at the time was a pretty, it was a slight overpay, but like kind of the expectation was, hey, we'll see if you can kind of work yourself into this. We're going to give you an opportunity to be the backup center after winning a championship. And he doesn't get rebounding. He doesn't understand the offensive end. And the only thing that he really understands is how to kind of mess around with the shot form. And it's not good enough. Like, he just doesn't understand it. Like, I don't know how to say it any other way than that. And that sounds harsh.
And I mean, this is what I was referencing when I talked about getting 5 players on the floor that had the court awareness to break the zone. Like, it was just, like, really, tough to deal with that. Otherwise, I don't know how else to say it. Let's move on to something a little bit more fun. So the way that we're going to do this, try not to go in order. Pick whichever order you want to go in. Ryan, you're going to have 24 seconds to say the name of a player that this team does not want to see in the playoffs. I forgot to let you know. You can choose to go second if you want. If you want me to go first.
I'll go first. Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go.
3, 2, 1, go.
Nuggets.
Luka Doncic.
Rockets.
Nikola Jokic.
Wolves.
Let's go Luka Doncic.
Kings.
Jokic.
Warriors.
LeBron.
Lakers.
Jokic.
Suns.
Luka.
Oh, time up. How many of these can you say Jokic for? Because arguably,
I think you can say Jokic for a lot of them, but
I'm trying to get creative with it. Like,
I
don't necessarily want to say Jokic for everybody, but because Luka, I think is definitely a fearsome one for a lot of these teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, especially the Wolves.
Yeah, like the Wolves, for example, like, yeah, they'll be afraid of Jokic, but they also know that they can do it. They don't know that they can do it against him, against Luka.
Right. They also know, like, if they've got Jokic, they probably also have Jamal Murray, and then they're like, okay.
Yeah, that's the natural byproduct. It's like, okay, on one hand, Jokic, but on the other hand, Jamal. That's funny. Okay, now is it me going for you?
3, 2, 1, go.
Suns,
Anthony Edwards,
Grizzlies,
Steph Curry,
Warriors,
Jokic,
Rockets,
oh my gosh, Jokic,
Kings,
Zion Williamson,
Thunder,
Jokic,
Lakers.
Jokic.
All right, time. Gray said Jokic 4 times.
I did. Anyway, that about does it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Ryan. We're so glad to finally get you and nerd out on lineup data. I really appreciate having somebody else to talk about this stuff with. I wanted to let you know, I haven't been doing like a rotation tracker, but before the season started, I kind of built some of my my ideal Nuggets rotations, and I totally stole your color scheme from your rotation tracker.
That's
on
awesome.
these spreadsheets, so that I could compare directly. So centers are purple and like all of that.
That's awesome. Well, I'll make sure to get you on Pickaxe, and we can nerd out about some of your ideal lineups, and then maybe we could have some lineup data behind that going forward. That'll be pretty fun.
I will be excited to just get more data collected. That's the exciting thing about every single game, is that we get more and more precious data. Is there anything that you want to plug for the audience before we wrap up?
No. I mean, most if you know Nuggets, hopefully you know that my coverage is at Mile High Sports now. I'm doing Locked On Nuggets, as was mentioned at the top, and it's been a lot of fun to be doing that show with Matt and with Swipa. So just very excited to be a part of it, and very excited to always be a part of the Nuggets community. So I'm on Blue Sky now. That's a thing. I think I'm Ryan.Blackburn at Blue Sky or something like that. So finally got away from just NBA Blackburn on Twitter.
Yeah, definitely good to have an identity separate of the NBA. I don't know if anybody knows this, but my handle is just based on what's the feminine of Aaron Burr, because I'm obsessed with the Hamilton character, not the actual dude, because he was, I guess the character was also a bad guy, but my name is not Aaron. It's actually Grace, just for the people that keep asking me that. If you like our content, please remember to hit the like button. Please subscribe and share our show. We're trying to grow the channel. Hit the notification bell as well, so that you can stay updated on all of our content. Leave us a review if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon Music. And even if you're not, you guys should head over there and give us a 5-star review anyway. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at What's in a Game NBA. We have our new, I still have it listed as a new clip channel, but it's been around, at What's in a Game NBA Clips. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.